Hello and welcome to Public Conscience. The program draws attention to issues of good governance, citizens' participation, and corruption. The program is brought by the Progressive Impact Organization for Community Development, PRIMORG. I am Adaobi Obiabumo, and I'm with my colleague Esther Bassi.
Thanks for joining us. The spelling of PRIMORG is P-R-I-M-O-R-G. That is P-R-I-M-O-R-G.
I must say that this program is brought to you in partnership with the MacArthur Foundation. On Public Conscience, we seek to increase the level of accountability in governance and promote citizens' active participation and involvement to hold leaders accountable. We raise issues of national importance to increase your consciousness as a citizen.
Well, everywhere in the world, the rule of law is the bedrock of a better society. It's a key component of a better leadership and also the fundamental ideal enshrined in every constitution. Today's program will focus on the rule of law crisis in Nigeria and its impact on democracy and national development.
The Nigerian Constitution provides for the rule of law to be adhered to. Unfortunately, since Nigeria's return to civil rule, citizens and activists have continued to raise concerns over persistent violation of the rule of law by past and present leaders who swore to protect faith. The application of the rule of law in Nigeria faces several significant challenges, including corruption, weak institutions, political interference, access to justice, and so on.
A more recent development that got Nigerians talking was the declaration of state of emergency in Rivers State, followed by the appointment of a sole administrator by President Bola Tinubu, who maintained that his actions were predicated on Section 305 of the Constitution. However, a lot of Nigerians differed with the president, including the Nigerian Bar Association (NBA). Recall that the Port Harcourt branch of the Nigerian Bar Association strongly criticized the sole administrator of Rivers State, Vice Admiral Ibokete Ibas, retired, for sacking political appointees and appointing people into positions while calling for an immediate review and reversal of the emergency governance framework in Rivers State.
In simple terms, the rule of law implies that every citizen, without exception, is subject to the law of the land. But the big questions are, can this be said of Nigeria since the return to democracy? Is it not obvious that some persons are above the law in Nigeria? In certain circumstances, the rules are twisted to suit the desires of leaders. The President and the National Assembly have been accused of twisting and circumventing the provisions of the Constitution to arrive at the declarations of emergency rule in Rivers State. 11 state governors of the opposition are in the Supreme Court challenging the declaration of emergency rule. We have seen judicial pronouncements which suggest that judgments were traded. How did the rule of law denigrate to its low level in Nigeria? Why do we start as a country to rebuild the low state of rule of law? In Nigeria, how can we get political office holders to lead in entrenching the rule of law in the country? Do you think Nigeria needs a change of constitution to address the rule of law crisis? Lots of questions there. And do you also think that President Tinubu should heed the calls of some Nigerians to return Rivers State to democratic governance immediately?
Be ready to join us through phone and text messages during this conversation. The WhatsApp phone line to send your message is 0902 265 6167. That is 0902 265 6167. Please indicate your name and your location when sending this message.
Please begin to send your messages as soon as possible to 0902 265 6167. That is 0902 265 6167. We will give out the numbers to call immediately.
If you just joined us, the focus is on the rule of law crisis in Nigeria and its impact on democracy and national development. We will touch on the emergency rule in Rivers State, which some Nigerians still hold contrary opinions, and how the rule of law can be better enshrined in the country.
But joining us to discuss these issues of national importance is the Executive Director of Citizens Advocacy for Social and Economic Rights, Barrister Frank Tietie. You're welcome.
Thank you, and my pleasure.
And Happy New Year.
Indeed.
I also have in the studio Public Affairs and Political Analyst, Jaye Gaskia. You're welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's start off with Barrister Frank Tete. For the benefit of our listeners and those who joined us via Facebook, could you give us a simplified understanding of what the rule of law entails?
Now, your question is interesting. You're asking
what exactly is the rule of law?
There is what we call the supremacy of the law. And if you look at the first, the Section 1 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the Declaration of the Supremacy of the Constitution, means that we are a people who should be governed by law, not by the will of anybody. We are not a kingdom, we are not a monarchy, we are not a dictatorship. We are a people who came together and to submit ourselves to the standards defined by law. Now, standards of behavior in all spheres of life, whether in business, in politics, in every area where there needs to be regulation, people can no longer be a law to themselves when they have decided to come together as a Nigerian society. They must now operate according to standards defined by law. So in that case, it helps people to be certain, to know what it's what we call certainty. And then it also ensures stability. It ensures predictability. People are able to predict what outcomes can be of any whatever action or whatever plans that they have. Now, societies grow because of such elements that law provides. So, in a nutshell, the rule of law is where people submit themselves to be governed by common standards that have been defined by the law that they themselves made. So in that case, you see that concepts like equality before the law. No one is above the law. That the law is supreme. So it's interesting. The challenge therefore is a society can no longer be or can no more be a reflection than what its laws are. So the quality of laws of society actually reflected by the kind of society that the people have. So a good country, a good example, we have Western democracies that we copied the prevalence of rule of law from. There are also other countries where it's still governed by the will of man, or the will of a cult or the will of an oligarchy. But those countries over the years have progressed in terms of their economy and stability. That's why Nigeria wants to emulate them by practicing the rule of law.
Okay, thank you for that background. I'm talking about supremacy of the law, common standard. Now let's get to the senior man in the house, Jai Gaskia. Frank Tete has talked about the law, the rule of law. But some Nigerians have said that there is abuse of this rule of law in Nigeria. How did we get here when we have a constitution that should be a guide for everybody? Because like you said, nobody's above the law.
Yeah, so that's nobody's above the law, and that's a presumption. That's a presumption of the law that nobody is above the law. But that again then depends on who these bodies are. Okay, and so for me, really, when we look at how did we get here, and then in the context of the rule of law is both principle. So those are the things that Frank has stated, but also practice in terms of how do we then interact with our body of laws. How are our laws made, for instance? What are the levels of contestation that goes into making of the law? Is there a consensus on some of those laws, for instance? Because the more there is consensus, the more likely that there will be rule of law. The more that you don't have a consensus, the less likely is that you are going to have the rule of law, observed. The second thing about the rule of law is also that because, again, we are saying that we have made these laws for ourselves, but we have to make those laws first in the first instance. And law also keeps changing. So that's why I said the rule of law is about the principle of fidelity to the law as it exists. Bearing in mind that law can actually also change. And then you would then have to be fidel to the changed, law. And that's why consensus, matters. Now, how did we get here? I think that the biggest challenge for us with respect to the rule of law has been more at the level of what I would call the impunity of political actors. Because essentially, leadership in a society is first and foremost political, and then economic, and then social, and so on and so forth. It's the political leadership that actually, accounts for this. Yeah. But when you have a political leadership amongst whom there is no consensus, within which there is a cutthroat fight, actually, really, because you can't say contestation, really fight, fight to the death. When you have that, then you have a situation where you are already creating, the conditions for the rule of law to be observed in abeyance, rather than to be stopped. So it means that all these competing groups within the leadership, within the ruling class, they would be looking for ways and manners to undermine the law, to undermine the rule of law, and then to also mobilize. And they do that also by mobilizing grievances. So you can have grievances that are not even related to the law, but you mobilize the grievances in order for you to undermine a particular law so that you can then move forward. So in that context where you, and I think that when Frank mentioned some other countries, you see the level of advancement of countries is also predicated on the level of consensus that the ruling elites have built amongst themselves, and then have built between themselves and the governed. And so where that consensus is not there, or is falling apart, like in the case of Nigeria, then you're going to have these multiple contestations.
So we can say the rule of law is a myth in Nigeria rather than a reality?
It is both a myth and a reality. Because the rule of law is very real for you, I should think. I mean, for me, for example, I know that if I violate the law, okay, I'm going to be held accountable. Probably also because you have positioned yourself as a critic. But I also know that people who are also poor, if they violate the law, they will be held, accountable to the law. That's why I say so. It is both a myth and a reality. So it's a reality for the majority of the people who really don't have any, who don't have the capacity, to undermine the law without consequences. Okay? But for those who have the capacity to undermine the law, and without any consequences, the rule of law is really a myth. Where that comes. And that's not the kind of state that we want to get into. We want to get to a state where, for everybody, there is, that there is a consequence,
not
for not undermining your status of position, that there is a consequence that will be applied to you for undermining something that there is a consensus around, that we have all agreed this is how we intend, to manage our affairs.
Okay, so now let's shift gear to Rivers State. For Barrister Frank Tete, I know the president hinged statement around the state of emergency in Rivers State on Section 305, especially subsection 3 of the Constitution. Do you think that is justified? And do you think that all the parameters stated in that subsection were met before the declaration?
Well, the law with regards to the state of emergency in Nigeria is still developing. Let's understand that there is no doubt that the president does have powers to declare a state of emergency in any part of the country if the conditions are ripe for such a declaration. I think the trouble with regards to this particular case in Rivers is, and has always been, the issue of appointment of the sole administrator. There are issues and there are possibilities that disgruntled elements can actually foist a situation of that leads to a breakdown of public order that could elicit the president's declaration of a state of emergency. There are also other thoughts that the president ought to have declared a state of emergency in other places first before Rivers State, that has been having some measure of peace, relative peace, I would say, for some time, other than states like Borno State, which has a few weeks ago 3 local governments under the control of the terrorist group Boko Haram. So the declaration of a state of emergency in Rivers State has been seen to be largely political, and that there was no need for the president to have done that if where there hasn't been sufficient exhaustion of the ability of the state forces, whether the police or the armed forces, to provide or ensure that there is public order. But the declaration of the state of emergency has been linked to a feud between the sitting governor and the immediate past governor, who is currently the minister of the FCT, who has been seen to be quite overbearing, who is overclaiming his rights of installing the governor, and the governor being seen to be rebellious to his former benefactor. So to reduce such kind of political feud with two political giants to a point where the president comes in, instead of using his powers as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces to ensure peace, but decides to wield the big stick of the state of emergency, makes it very, very doubtful that he had the best of intention for Rivers State.
So would you say that his intentions were political?
Oh yes, they were political. They were not in the best interest of the country, not in the best interest of the people of Rivers State, but simply a demonstration of his alignment and affinity with the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory, Nyesom Wike, who is very unhappy with the governor. In this case, and that's the reason why the provision of Section 305 was not really followed appropriately, because at that point, if you look at the provisions of Section 4, subsection 4 and 5, you realize that the president ought to have satisfied himself that the governor, has lost control, and that the governor does not or did not have the resources or the political will to ensure order. The governor, if you look at it, if you extend it, you find that because the governor actually has the legal responsibility to invite the president to declare a state of emergency, the first thing to be considered is that even if the president has now overridden the governor to declare a state of emergency, he ought not in any way, by law, under any provision of the law, to suspend the governor. Now, because we've had very terrible and illegal precedents in the past that haven't been challenged appropriately, and we haven't expressed their declaration by the Supreme Court, this president has decided to proceed on that path of error by suspending a democratically elected governor. That's democratically, that's criminal in democratic sense.
Okay, we know that the president may make mistakes. That is why we have the National Assembly to correct or to check some of the excesses of the president. But if you look at Section 305, again, subsection 6b, that talks about 2/3 majority of all the members of each house of the National Assembly approving the declaration. Now, this section talks about 2/3 of each chamber, not 2/3 of those who are present at the National Assembly. Now, if you break it down to Senate, 2/3 of 106 members, and the House of Representatives, 2/3 of 360 members. Did the National Assembly meet that, or they just
I hope you see, the point is this. Anytime we are on public radio or television, we are duty bound to state the truth and to state things the way they are, particularly as a lawyer. And people like Jai Garcia, who are the social conscious, will not also say differently. It was a huge aberration and a great embarrassment on the part of the Nigerian National Assembly when he resorted to disregarding provisions of the Constitution when it came to ratifying the declaration of state of emergency by the president. At that point, Nigerians ought to be mourning and grieving the fact that the principle of checks and balances has been lost when the Nigerian National Assembly decided to even proceed to endorse whatever the president did with regards to the declaration of state of emergency, not even by engaging in voting, but by carrying on what such a obnoxious kind of practice called voice vote. It was clearly unconstitutional, clearly illegal. But that's what happens when you have a very powerful president who appears to be so powerful that even the members of the National Assembly, the Senate President, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives all afraid of him. Now, this is not how to build a country, and this is not how a democracy works. Democracy does not put self first. Democracy does not exalt one particular person to a role of a king that they cannot make mistakes, whose words is law. Now, everybody in government, whether I'm not talking larger government, not the administration alone, is afraid of the president. Or even if they are not afraid, they want to fall in line because of what they are getting in terms of benefit. If we do
at
that,
the detriment of Nigeria.
Well, to the detriment of Nigeria, but that's not how to build a country. We're just tearing down our country. I don't want to say much because Jaigas is here. I know he has a lot more to say.
Okay.
But if I had my mind, if I had my way, I would simply say that if the president, and you got it right when you say, look, the president is bound to make mistake, but in this case, not a mistake. We have a president who has decided that he wants to, maximize powers for his own political advantage against the larger interest of Nigeria and the future well-being of the people of Nigeria. Somebody needs to call into order. It's not me. It is those who have the constitutional responsibility, and those ones have abdicated it, they've given it up for one sort of comfort, one sort of benefit that they're getting. So they can't mortgage the future of this country just like that. And that's why we have a public conscience radio today to say, look, something's just wrong. So it's not just about the president, it's about the irresponsibility of so many others. And we can come down the line, even though we can also come down to the media. So, because we need to call out the president and probably talk some sense to you and say, you can't turn this country upside down when clearly the laws say you should do this or don't do this.
All right, thank you very much for that submission. Let's come to Jai Gaskia. Well, according to the President Bola Tinubu, he has said that Vice Admiral Ibas, retired, was appointed to ensure peace in Rivers and also to stabilize the state. What would be your assessment of how the sole administrator has carried out this assignment so far?
And do you also agree with the procedures that led to the appointment of the sole administrator?
Let's start from the one that appears to be simple, which is the process. Again, the full reading of Section 305 and all of the subsections is because all of the subsections are, for instance, you are not. And that's why I agree with the fact that our laws on state of emergency they are still evolving. And we are a country where, rather than err on the side of caution, we always stretch things. And so we're a country where everything has to actually be written down on dotted lines. And so you have to include more sections, more subsections into that section in order to declare that this is actually what we need. But if you take that subsection and that section and all the subsections, because it's the reading of it together is that you don't have to fulfill all of the conditions. They are conditional. You say or if. So it means that you can say that this condition is fulfilled, this one is not fulfilled, and you can on balance. Again, it leaves that balance to the discretion of the president to make that decision. The second thing for me that is also very unclear about our law is that what does it mean to declare a state of emergency? What does a state of emergency? What would a state of emergency mean in a state? And particularly if you're also talking about lawmaking powers and the National Assembly and so on and so forth. So, what exactly does a state of emergency mean? How do you declare a state of emergency? What does that mean? What's the implication of that for the functioning of state institutions in that? But that said, I think that the best way to challenge what the president has done is really on the question of because the president can do everything he wants to do up to the point of gazetting it and sending it to the National Assembly. Yeah. But then there is also a constitutional provision about how the National Assembly should then proceed. Okay? I mean, we can even agree, quote and unquote, that by your own rules of procedure, that once a quorum is formed, that is the chamber meeting. We can agree on that, okay? But how do you determine 2/3 of whether it is the full chamber or of the quorum? How do you determine 2/3 from a voice vote? I mean, it's impossible to determine 2/3 because 2/3 is a very specific It's a very specific threshold. So it's not something that you decide. So I think that those are the kind of things that can be challenged, that should and that ought to be challenged. So that people who are actually challenging, I think that if people go to court, for example, the Supreme Court, to to question the power of the president to declare a state of emergency, I think that they are probably going to lose. But I think that if they question how the two-thirds majority, I think that they would most likely really win. So it's about, again, what you go to court to go and ask for because of the blood lines. Now, that said, now let's get back to
the assessment.
The assessment of so even by the name sole administrator, it already encompasses everything that is like not the law. Because the sole administrator means you are saying that the entire administration now is one single person. Okay, so but the moment you are talking about a sole administrator, then you are saying that all the other institutions and parameters of government, so all the other arms of government, they are actually really no longer, they are redundant. That's what a sole administrator means, and I think we need to challenge that notion of a sole administrator. Okay. And so if we now begin to look at, and the sole administrator has been acting as a sole administrator. And so if you are acting as a sole administrator, ab initio, you are going to be, making mistakes. So for example, dissolution of the local governments, and then appointment of
was that within his jurisdiction?
That's exactly what I'm saying. But because you have said it's sole, okay, but that again needs to be challenged, okay, because not even a state assembly actually has processes and procedures for dissolving and removing local government, elected local government, and we already have Supreme Court rulings in terms of the fact that they have to be elected and so on and so forth. And then you remove everybody. So it went through where you reported them to who? Is it the National Assembly, whatever? It went through where, what was the process, and how did you then arrive at that? And the Supreme Court is also very clear on the fact that elected local government officials are tenured. They are tenured. Okay? And it's only either through the provisions of Constitution, in which case it's their own councillors who can remove them, or another election. And I think we just need to. Earlier, I was saying that, look, one of the biggest problems, really, about how we have gotten to where we have gotten right now, and why this kind of charade can be going on in Rivers State. Why, for example, you can even have a former governor, let's call a spade by a spade, a godfather and a godson, in Nigeria's political terms, fighting to the point where the state becomes like this thing for them, that we can even have that, and we can allow it and tolerate it for that long, up to the point where, because by everything, by the pronouncements of the Supreme Court, for example, on the House of Assembly, it already legitimized what ought not to be legitimate. Because again, you can also ask the question, those people said they openly declared that they had decamped. Okay? All right. Now, but the court did not rule on that. The court ruled on this thing. And then again, our laws again in terms of, so who interprets that? Because that later goes to this thing. And then again, you also have a situation now where you now say, so if 27 actually decamped and their seats are vacant, again, this also has implication. Can the remaining 5, then be legally considered a House of Assembly, and a legislature in the context of what we are saying? So you can see the way and manner in which we have allowed political interests to simply just mess up our institutions, and yet these institutions can actually function without this interference. So I think the civic space and civic activism is really what is missing right now. And I think it's also because of the fact that the civic space, has also been intruded. So the civic space used to be like more or less neutral, okay? But now you now have the civic space aligned to politicians. Not political positions, but to politicians, because you can have the same political positions with politicians, but aligned to specific politicians. Then it becomes more difficult, and I think that's part of the confusion right now. That's why it's more difficult, for instance, for those who want to do something and do something real about it to do it, because your voice just simply gets swallowed by everybody else who is either for this person or for that person. So, is the sole administrator, he has been behaving as a sole administrator, even as an administrator, because if he was administering, he has no this thing with all these people. The other day he said he was also that they were working on a new budget. Okay, now he's working on the budget with who?
Who would approve?
Yeah, exactly. Look, ordinarily, you expect that now that the State Assembly has been also suspended, that it reverts to the National Assembly. Yeah, but I mean, so you are doing that again. But is the National Assembly aware of what? And then who in the National Assembly? Because there are members who are representing River State in that National Assembly, and they belong to two camps as well.
Okay, we'll hold you there so that we can bring in those listening to us to join the conversation.
Please follow us on our social media platforms at official PRIMORG. PRIMORG is spelled PRIMORG. Remember that we are streaming live on Facebook at official PRIMORG. Remember
that the program is interactive. The WhatsApp phone line to send your message to 0902 265 6167 090 2265 6167. And you can also call to join the conversation. What would be your contribution so far? Where do we start as a country to rebuild the low state of rule of law in Nigeria? Hello? Hello? Yes, good morning. Your name and where you're calling us from?
My name is Kenneth.
All right, Kenneth, go ahead. What's your contribution to the conversation?
My concern is that what the president do in that River State, I do not support it. It's like we have part of democracy and military in such a government, because that's what they put in River State is not elected. And for me, I'm seeing it as an extension of the former governor of them.
Which of
council in case of River State?
Okay, so what?
Administration. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Kenneth. He feels that is an extension of the former governor of River State, but I was going to ask which of the former governors.
Obviously, Wiki.
He actually mentioned Wiki at the end.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Okay, so back to the question I was asking Frank, because just like our last caller, I don't think Nigerians are in support with the president.
Many Nigerians are in support, but
so what approach would you think would be suitable for such?
The Nigerians who actually go through the process to support the president.
So,
demonstration, I would say, to support the president. Let me tell you, the respected Jai Gaskia was on a path. Was giving us basic jurisprudence when he talked about the need for consensus for law to work. I thought it was too complex the way he was going about it. So I was hoping that we could, break it down. And in trying to break it down, let me tell you this. In Nigeria, somebody who's set to do an illegal thing, to make up his mind, who has power to do something legally, he would do it, knowing that there will be no consequences. Meanwhile, he has the responsibility to do the right thing, but he will do the wrong thing. Just imagine, they'll go on and then you say, you don't want to go to court, let's go to the Supreme Court. Well, by the time they come by the Supreme Court, 6 months is over. And then if he wants to do it again, he will look for another reason to do it. So, Jai Gaskia's reference to consensus is that, you see, the best of intentions the people in power have to have the best of intentions for our country. If not, what we're seeing is an abuse. Nothing, I must say, can be more annoying that should actually incense Nigerians to a point where they would consider that somebody who was not elected as against another person who campaigned. It doesn't matter whether it was Wicked or bought from for him or campaigned for him. He went through an election conducted by the Independent National Electoral Commission. Won, was sworn in as governor. And then, for one reason, which the Constitution does not contemplate, you go and check the Constitution, check every letter and every word in the Constitution. It's not like sole administrator. Unknown to law completely. The president is on the path of illegality to that extent. Removes, suspends an elected governor. And then he appoints one unknown fellow who used to be a soldier or a military man. And then he says he's sole administrator, and then everybody is normal. And I have had cause to remind the president. I said, please, sir, you know that you are a democratically elected president. The first thing that the military does, we grew up in the military. I was born under the military, grew up in the military. I must tell you, you understand? You know? So we understand. I witnessed several military coups in this country. The first thing they do is the suspension and modification of decree. They suspend the Constitution and suspend the National Assembly. For goodness sake, why would a democratically elected president act as if he's a military man? Look, and I've said it again and again, I will not go out in the street. I will only go out in the street to protest if any goddamn military man says he's suspending the Constitution and then he's taking away or taking over the powers of the president and then there's a military coup. I will go out in the street and fight him because I'll say this is not what we agreed. So my president cannot be doing that to a governor. That's the issue. And I don't expect that things should be normal. The way things are going in River State and every other person is quiet. It took people like us to protest first before PDP governors went to the Supreme Court. Look, we don't appear to be serious people. And again, so I go back to that jurisprudence we're dealing when you say consensus. But when you say consensus, you're actually saying that do we, collectively agree to what's going on now? And perhaps it's a majority of, that has considered that this should agree. I mean, we agree to be allowed. Well, because we are a law-governed country and we're a republic, if the National Assembly has so agreed, then let it be. But it does have consequences. Consequences is that we can, when it is convenient, to discard our democratic tenets and our laws in general. That's a very dangerous trend that is coming.
All right.
Very dangerous. And President Tinubu should be concerned.
Okay, let's take this call. Hello? Hello? Kenneth again.
My name is Kenneth from Gareta.
Go ahead.
Just like I said, anything that is scientifically proven can be proven any place in any part of the world. Is that not true? I should not see the reason why the National Assembly will be playing with this our democracy by saying no on two-thirds of what is supposed to be definite. You understand me? They are also the contributors of this case that is happening in River State. If they do not condescend to what the president do, they could have also reversed the law by them making a good law for us. They always compromise with the executive, which is not good. That is to say, there is no separation of power. Yes, you can reason with one another. But not when to the detriment of Nigerians. Like I said, it's the extension of constant. Why these people?
Kenneth, could you wrap up in 30 seconds?
You cannot go ahead. This is the extension of constant of a pandemic. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Kenneth. We have a message on Facebook here from Samuel, and it says, I still share in the opinion that the president didn't act in the best interest of the country in his actions in Rivers State. The same thing was happening in Lagos State House of Assembly, and the president invited them to Abuja. And the same day, their issues were resolved. Thank you so much, Samuel. Keep the messages coming. Hello.
Hello, good morning.
Yes, good morning. Your name and where you're calling us from? Loud and clear. What's your name?
Okay, my name is Usman, calling from Gareta.
Okay, Usman. Please go ahead. What's your contribution?
Okay. Yeah. You see, concerning this issue at stake, what I would say is because me, I want to give it a political connotation. Because all this right from the people.
Are you still there, Usman? Okay, do well to call us back. Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Is that Usman?
Okay, my name is Usman. Calling from Garupa.
All right, go ahead, Usman.
Okay. You see, all these issues of Rivers State, yes, I agree. It's against the constitution or other things. But remember, right from the beginning, it is politically motivated. And that is why knowing it very well, Governor Kavara, knowing it very well that he cannot withstand the powers at due. And he went on, people were starting at him, but you see, in this, our democracy that you have, executive president, especially in Nigeria, we know how the executive president exercises his powers. He can do and undo, and nothing will happen. And that is why, let me remind those who get to listen, politics is not something that if you start at this way or at that. Kubara doesn't expect this thing to happen to him. He thinks that it's something that's just a joke. But now that this that happened, my only advice or advice is because politics in Nigeria is something else in this country. And that is why if you love your people, just, let me say, confide with the power at due. Get this man that we are quarreling with, the current president and minister of FCT, which you will do. Go and beg him. So that things will move forward. You can come back as a governor and move on. If to the extent that, in fact, going back to ATC, that's fine. If you mean what to Rivers State, that is only because me, I'm very a political understand.
If you can hear me, can you? Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
You can interpret it the way you feel like, and that is why Labour Tribunal to keep on debating. It's just an interpretation. Just Mr. President have the right.
Can you hear me? Can you?
Yes, I'm telling you.
Okay, so what
He
is
has
the?
the right. Constitution gave him that mandate to actually do what he did in Rivers State, and nothing about it.
All right, thank you so
My
much.
advice is just a Rivers State governor to go and beg his vote.
What if the former governor? What if the? Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
What if the former governor was wrong? Should he go back and beg him as a current governor? Go back and beg the former governor, even when you know what the former governor did was wrong.
We keep on crying out in Nigerian politics, godfatherism. When Wike did what he did to bring him into power, where were you then? Nobody knows how Wike brought him to power. So you see, this is what we are against.
All right.
This is the same thing what happened in Kano.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for your contribution.
All right, so I wanted to come to you in the Constitution. Do you think we need a new Constitution in order for us to solve the rule of law crisis we have in Nigeria?
Greek philosophers, they did say that the more corrupt a society, the more numerous their laws. We don't have a problem with the Constitution. I mean, even this, as ambiguous as some of these things are, seriously, there's really no problem with it. So, for example, I said earlier, I mean, what you would have expected and what the National Assembly was expected to do when that gazette reached it was not just to vote on whether it was accepting the declaration of it, but also to now also, the criteria and the conditions under which, that emergency rule is going to be, that would be their prerogative. And you don't need to write all of those things into the Constitution, because let's look at it. Every assembly has undertaken constitutional review in this country. And we have a constitution that since 1999 we have been reviewing. I'm of the opinion that with this set of leadership that we have in the country, this political class and the economic class that we have in this country, that no law can be perfect for them. It's the same thing with the way we have, I think, over-reformed INEC, over-reformed the Electoral Act, but these individuals are still there, to subvert it. And that's why I keep going back to the question of civic activism. When we talk about the status, look, for instance, at the Constitution of the United States. It's a pamphlet. Of course, their body of law is probably would feel a library, okay? But you look at that constitution, look at the way it's been interpreted. Now, the thing about it is really about citizen activism. How citizens themselves engage with these institutions. And I think we have lost that part of popular engagement.
Okay, for want of time, I want you to give us your last word and also a way forward out of all of this crisis we have when it comes to our rule of law in Nigeria.
When it comes to our rule of law in Nigeria, for me, I think that citizens have to simply just wake up. Citizens need to wake up, and citizens need to start organizing collectively again. And there's going to be cacophony of voices. We are going to organize differently. But let us start organizing. In the contestation of this organizing, we are going to arrive at what is best for us. But we have to start organizing, we have to start mobilizing, and we have to start challenging what we feel is bad. Because otherwise, if we just leave it, then what we feel is bad will just become a precedent for somebody else to use sometime else.
All right, let's quickly get to Frank Tete. What do you think the judiciary must do, and bodies like Nigerian Bar Association? What do you think they need?
I think Nigerian Bar Association is becoming unnecessarily political. Judiciary is fast losing grounds in terms of credibility because of the conflicting judgments and judgments that don't resemble the foundation of law that are emanating from the judiciary. So nobody can give what it does not have. Right now, judiciary does not have a solution to the current problems in Nigeria because it has become part of the problem. I think that to whom much is given, much is expected. So much is given to the Nigerian president. He has to have goodwill. He has to have good intentions. He has to have the best of interest for this country and to act accordingly. If he decides to be subversive of the basic laws that we have in this country, then he becomes an agent of retrogression. So the call should go to the right person. The person who is creating, who has so much powers, is using the powers not to really make progress. He's not, guaranteeing much of security in this country. He is also not guaranteeing political stability by not promoting. I think he's not guaranteeing political stability by promoting. He should have been promoting tenets of democracy. We're not saying that in Rivers State. The first thing they should do is that they should make a 360 degrees, turn around in Rivers State. Sack the sole administrator today, immediately. It does not. In fact, don't insult the sensibility of Nigerians. Don't annoy us, at the bill of Rivers State by doing something that is so brazenly against the law. When you declare state of emergency, the constitution does not in any way contemplate that you should suspend the governor. Who are you in this country as an individual? What powers have you to suspend an elected House of Assembly and an elected governor? The president should immediately reverse all of those actions and apologize, and then tell Nigerians that he's on a new path of, ensuring the tenets of democracy are going to be respected in this country going forward.
Thank you so much for your contribution. We've really had a robust conversation, and this is not the end. The conversation will still continue online and offline. Esther, we really must go.
Please visit our news website, primorgnews.org. That is primorgnews.org. For all the details of our reports and interviews, visit our website, www.primorg.org, to get all the information about Primorg.
I most sincerely apologize. Our time is up. The calls are still coming in and we cannot take any more calls. You can watch our videos on PRIMORG TV, our YouTube channel. Please subscribe to get reminders when we have a new post. We sincerely appreciate our guests, Public Affairs and Political Analyst Jayeja Gaskia. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And also to the Executive Director of Citizens Advocacy for Social and Economic Rights, Barrister Frank Tete. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, my pleasure.
For all those who called in, thank you. Public Conscience has the support of the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. Get more information about the foundation on its website, macfound.org.
Join us again here next week for another episode of Public Conscience, and remember to follow us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, on at Official Primorg. I am Esther Basti.
Remember that birth registration and certificates are both free. If your child is under 18, help stop the corruption in birth registration and do not pay for birth certificates. Also remember that you can give us information or hints about corrupt acts through our phone at 0902-265-6167 or info@primorg.org. I am Adaobi Ubiabamo. Thank you for listening.